So as I said, we're going to begin a intermittent series, like every month or 6 weeks, we will talk some about the lives of the women that we have several pictures up on the stairwell as you're coming up into the shrine area. And these are all women that have been powerful pioneers in their spiritual in their spiritual lives, and then the teachings that they've offered from their own hearts and their own experience. And I'll begin tonight by quoting from the Parinibbana Sutta. This is in the Long Discourses, Sutta number 16. And at the very beginning of the sutta, there's a leader, a prince, and his father asks him to go and ask the Buddha about whether or not they should go to war. And the Buddha just does a very clever thing by having a conversation with his attendant in front of this prince about these 7 principles that ensure strength, they ensure growth in a community and guard from decline. And when he's having this conversation with his attendant, it's clear that the people that the king and prince want to go to war against are very, very strong. They're keeping all 7 of these principles. And then the Buddha goes on to describe Sangha, describe his spiritual community and these 7 principles. And one of these principles for ensuring growth and health and well-being of a community is honoring elders. The Buddha talks about as long as the mendicants, or as long as the meditators, as long as the practitioners honor, respect, esteem, and venerate elders, and think them worthy of listening to, they can expect growth, not decline. And indeed, this value, this orientation of respecting elders is something that generation by generation in our culture is weakening. There's more of a veneration of youth and not this veneration of elders. My children studied Suzuki violin, and in Japanese culture, which is where this approach of teaching music comes from, this is a strong value, this value of honoring and respecting and venerating elders and people that have gone before. And my children were little, and each lesson began with them. It was a ritual. They were to tuck their violin under their arm. They're like 5 years old. Actually, they were 6 or 7, and then bow to their teacher and say, I'm ready to learn. And then at the end of the lesson, tuck their violin again, bow, and say, thank you for teaching me. So tonight, we really want to honor, actually, it'll be a handful of women tonight that have gone before and that we truly are standing on the shoulders of. And Ayya Khema is a bright light in that group. And wonderfully, there's someone comes to our community all the time, Julie from Germany. Her teacher was a principal student of Ayya Khema's and took over the monastery in Munich, Buddha house, and it's still there after Ayya Khema's passing in 1997. So that being said, I'm going to play a couple of. I want Ayya Khema to introduce herself to you. There's a interview on YouTube. It's not even 40 minutes long of Ayya Khema speaking about her life, and I'm just going to play the first couple of minutes of it. Maybe not just yet, but something's not working. Your screen sharing is paused. Okay, stop. Let's try this again. Maybe this isn't going to work. I hope so. Okay.
My name is Ayya Khema, and I'm a Theravadan Buddhist nun. I was born in 1923 in Berlin, in Germany, and I'm Jewish. So when Hitler came to power, I was 10 years old, and I went through some of the misery that was inherent in being a Jew in Germany in those years. And in 1938, I was sent out with a children's transport to Glasgow, Scotland, and taken in by a Jewish family there. I went to school in Glasgow. And my parents escaped to China, to Shanghai. So when the war in Europe started, my father sent a ticket for me, and I went on a Japanese freighter from Liverpool, to Shanghai, which was a journey of about 6 weeks under war conditions, and quite frightening to a young girl. In China, I was reunited with my parents, and everything went fine until 1943, when the Japanese put us in a civilian prisoner of war camp. There were 18,000 Jews in that camp, and my father did not survive. He died there. And then we were sort of liberated by the Americans, and I never forget the day when the GIs came to the camp with the Hershey bars in their pockets. And we were very glad of it too. And we were taken on converted troop transport to America, but that took years because there were 18,000 of us. So I didn't come to America until 1949, 4 years after the end of the war. And there was no way to get out of the camp except it was open then. We were no longer confined, but we had to stay there. There was no other place to go. And I became an American citizen, which was a great day in my life because we had become stateless. We had no nationality when Hitler came to power. And
so that was the beginning of her life. And because she went on the children's transport to Glasgow, she speaks English. And we have all these teachings available to us as English speakers. So yeah, she was 27 or so, 26 by the time she got to America, and she was married and had a daughter, and then there was quite a big gap between her first child and her second child. Then she had a son, and yeah, she was a housewife in Los Angeles and had quite a lot of discontent and questions about life, and very much wanted to go on a spiritual journey. And her husband didn't share this interest at all. So they ended up splitting up. And shortly after her son Jeffrey was born, and she initially began her search. She moved to Mexico and studied this mystic component of Judaism. Makes sense. She was Jewish, so this is where she looked first. And she studied Essence. I've never heard of it, but it's a mystical sect in Judaism, and became vegetarian, and a true hippie, and met her second husband there, and his name was Gerd. And then they went with their son, their daughter, Ayya Khema's daughter, was already basically a university, and her son was a little boy, and they traveled the world. They were hitchhiking and caravans and kibbutzes, and in the 60s and 70s, Kathmandu, India, and they landed in Australia and started an organic farm where they were raising Shetland ponies and sort of living off the land. And it's there that I came in contact with a Theravada Buddhist monk, and she had started to meditate. She's now in her 50s. She had started to meditate through her travels through India and been in ashrams, but this was her contact with the Buddha's teachings. And uh, she got more and more serious and was going on 3-month retreats, and at one point returns from one of the retreats. Her son was university age, and her son is like, dad's left. Dad knows that this is what you want to be doing, and he's basically stepping aside and letting you do it. And his name was Gerd, and they stayed very, very close friends for the entire rest of her life. And often she would go visit Gerd and spend time with Gerd. He just didn't share to the extent that she had this passion for the Buddha's teachings. So she sold the farm, and then she began, like, basically wherever Ayya Khema went, she just started a monastery. So there many of them, some of them are still there. So in Queensland, in Australia, Buddha Dhamma House is still there, and it's still a monastery. And then she had already begun to teach some meditation, and she realized she wanted also to ordain. And the path for full ordination for women was not available. There was this party line that the Bhikkhuni lineage had died out, and you need a Bhikkhuni to make a Bhikkhuni. So sad, too bad. And it wasn't until really the 80s, the 90s, that there were more and more scholars looking at all of the Buddhist texts and beginning to translate more texts, that it became valid, according to some scholars, that there was a way to revive the Bhikkhuni ordination for women, full ordination for women. But until that time, Ayya Khema went to Sri Lanka, and she came in contact with another very, very famous Theravada Buddhist monk named Nyanaponika Thera. And Nyanaponika Thera was also German Jew. And Nyanaponika Thera is the main teacher of Bhikkhu Bodhi. And most of the translations that I read are from Bhikkhu Bodhi, an American, also Jewish, American Jewish monk, still alive. wonderful scholar. Bhikkhu Bodhi is a man. Yeah. And all of Ayya Khema's teachers were men. Because
bhikkhu is monk and bhikkhuni is nun.
Yeah, bhikkhu is monk, bhikkhuni is nun. Yes. So that was 1979 that Ayya Khema became a 10 precept nun, like a novice nun, like a starter out nun. She got her starter kit. And she was just a very, very powerful woman and a very, very powerful meditator and a very, very powerful Dhamma teacher. And so there was a Sri Lankan family that were smitten with her and with her teachings, and they were well off. And they insisted on being benefactors for her and gave her an island. It's called Nun's Island, and it's in Sri Lanka. And this was 1984. She started a monastery for women. And then by 1987, there was just so much turmoil in Sri Lanka, civil war, and very, very hard to get supplies. They couldn't even get their mail. It just really wasn't safe. So it was at that time that Ayya Khema, for the first time since World War II, returned to her homeland, returned to Germany. And she describes, she's written a book, I'll show it in a minute. She describes, she didn't know any of the Dhamma vocabulary in German. She knew it all in English. She'd been doing everything in English and teaching in English. She's on the plane flying to Germany, trying to figure out, that many of these words that we use, like aggregate and, sorry, I can't think of any, but like insight, all of these words that get used. And it just really welled up in her heart to become fully ordained. And she figured out a way. She went to Los Angeles in 1988 and received ordination through the Mahayana lineage. And this would be the Japanese, Chinese, Taiwanese, very, very strong. But Bhikkhuni order in these lands, very, very strong. And so wore Theravada robes, practiced Theravada Buddhism, but received Mahayana full ordination. And that was 1988. And the year before, 1987, she was one of the founding members of organization that still exists today called Sakyadhita. Sakyadhita, Pali word, and it means Daughters of the Buddha. And it's an international organization that is supporting women in robes, whatever level of ordination and whatever lineage, women in robes, supporting female monasticism, Sakyadhita. And Ayya Khema has a small connection with Alberta. I'll show you these pictures are up in our monastery. I hope you can see. This is a picture of also Austrian. This is an Austrian woman that immigrated to Canada. Her name is Anagarika Dhammadina. And so much of the roots, the foundation of Theravada Buddhism, lay and monastic, in Western Canada, all goes back to Anagarika Dhammadina. She was 10 years older than Ayya Khema, and she brought Ayya Khema to Alberta in, I think, 1987, actually, because in 1987, Ayya Khema in Alberta met this wonderful, wonderful woman who lives in Calgary and still alive, Jayanta, her lay name Shirley Johannesson. And she also powerful meditator, powerful Dhamma teacher, and Shirley Johansson, Ayya Khema met her and was like, asked her to found the Canadian chapter of Sakyadhita Canada. And we had Shirley Johansson is the woman who cut the ribbon at the opening of our monastery. Yeah. So Ayya Khema was truly a pioneer, and talk about a glass ceiling, constantly in environments where she was the only female Dhamma teacher, only female in robes. And I'll read it, but she was very strong, very, very strong. And I'm going to just read. There's several books that are actually just collections of her Dhamma teachings. This is a beautiful book, Be an Island. And she taught clearly and strongly and straight from the suttas. And this is written by one of her students, the foreword. And it's just, she's recollecting about Ayya. Ayya savored the peace and enclosure of monastic life, yet she was willing in the middle of our rains retreat, that's the 3-month retreat that we just had, to leave Nuns Island in Sri Lanka and fly to the United States to speak on a panel on women and Buddhism at a prestigious academic Buddhist Christian convocation. When she returned to the island, at our request, she shared the tape of her panel with us. On the tape, Ayya spoke briefly and concisely about the situation of women in Buddhist traditions. She told the truth in blunt, no-nonsense terms. And I remember thinking how extremely radical and brave she was in doing so. But it was in the Q&A, the question and answer period, that she captivated us and provoked a roar of approving laughter. A male questioner wondered, in a tone intended to trivialize and dismiss the whole subject of the panel, why there should be a separate panel comprised only of women to address the issue of women and Buddhism. Why couldn't the topic be incorporated into the other discussions? One panelist began a tempered, careful response, and then Ayya's voice cut in. Its tone balanced just on the edge of annoyance. Perhaps the questioner should ask instead, she suggested, why almost every one of the other panels at the conference was composed exclusively of men and excluded all concerns specific to women. That would be a more productive inquiry, she concluded, and the subject was closed. One could only imagine the look on the man's face as the room erupted in applause and amusement. Yeah, and I'm going to play another little clip from her interview, where she is talking about what she feels like is important with women's voices being included, and the benefit that she feels it can bring. I hope this works. Okay, so
I was married.
wait.
I had 2 children.
Okay, I want to go to 60.
very not strong at all. The strongest women are in America. And it's a very necessary step, especially, I think, in the spiritual life, because the women have always been the strongest supporters of any religion, and yet they're never heard from. As an example, on any given Poya Day, which is a holy day in Sri Lanka, you will find for 300 women and about 10 men in the temple. And I think that this would apply wherever we go. Now, in my courses, there are always more women than men, which I thought was due to the fact that I am a woman. But I've heard, meanwhile, that it is the same wherever you go, that there are far more women attracted to the spiritual life. So if that is the case, they're practicing, so they need to be heard from. And I find that women have the capacity for devotion and commitment, which is an absolutely integral part of any spiritual practice, because it is the part of the heart, the love part. So when they do that practice, they've already got an opening. And there's particular contribution to the Buddhist path obviously needs to be that love aspect where a woman can educate herself, train herself, develop her lovingness, where it becomes no longer directed personally, but becomes a quality of her heart. And as she does that, she will be not only a great boon to her friends and her family, but it will be of immense value to humanity at large. The more love there is, the easier it will be to live on this planet. And each woman that actually trains herself in this non-discriminating love, just as a heart quality, will be a peacemaker par excellence. There's no greater peacemaker than that. And I feel that this is women's role in any spiritual path, particularly, of course, the Buddhist path, that's the one I know and pursue. And
I wish to read one more very short offering. At the beginning, this is a book that Ayya Khema wrote about her life, the last year that she was alive. I'll read a very, very short clip from this and then read a little bit from a Dhamma talk of Ayya Khema. This is the very, very beginning of this book. Nuns and monks are supposed to communicate the Buddha's teachings, not tell stories about themselves. Now I have finally agreed. I have allowed myself to be convinced that my life story could perhaps serve as an inspiration for some people to enter upon a new way. Leaving external circumstances aside, it is the story of an average woman who for many years moved within a very ordinary mental world, but who was then capable of breaking out of it and emerging onto a new level of consciousness. And that is indeed true. Ayya Khema was one of the very, very first Dhamma teachers in these last few generations to speak about the jhanas and to speak about deeper states of meditation. And now I wish to end with her words, her Dhamma words. She often gets talked about as the Buddhist described when he utters the Dhamma that it's a lion's roar, and she's no pussycat. Okay, Okay, so this is you'll get a sense of her depth and clarity. So this is from Be an Island, and I've shortened it. Our own mind makes us happy or unhappy. Nothing else in the world can. The more we watch the mind and see what it does to us and for us, the more we will be inclined to take good care of it and treat it with respect. And then she quotes from the Dhammapada, verse 43. Neither mother nor father nor any other relative can do one as much good as one's own well-directed mind. Those are the Buddha's words. In the Buddha's words, nothing is more valuable than a controlled and skillfully directed mind. Taming one's mind does not happen only in meditation. That's just one specific training. The meditation can be likened to learning to play tennis. One practices with a coach again and again. That's the meditation, until one has found one's balance and aptitude and can actually play a match. The match in which we tame the mind is everyday life, every situation we encounter. The greatest support we can have is mindfulness, which means being totally present in each moment. If the mind remains centered, it cannot make up stories about the injustice of the world or one's friends or about one's desires or sorrows. All these stories could fill many volumes, but when we are mindful, such verbalizations stop. I've added, such verbalizations slow down, quiet down, and eventually stop. That's my little addition. Being mindful means being fully absorbed in the moment, leaving no room for anything else. We're filled with the momentary happening, whatever it is, standing or sitting or lying down, feeling pleasure or pain, and we maintain a non-judgmental awareness, just knowing. Any dukkha, any stress, suffering, difficulty that we have, great or small, continuous or intermittent, is created by our minds. We create all that happens to us. Nobody else is involved. Everybody else is playing his or her own role in this drama called life. Sometimes other people just happen to be around, and we imagine they're responsible for our difficulties. But in reality, whatever we do arises from our own mind moments. The more we watch our thoughts in meditation, the more insight can arise. When we watch mind moments arising, staying, and ceasing, detachment from our thinking process results, bringing dispassion. Thoughts come and go all the time, just like the breath. If we hang on to them, problems arise. We believe we own our thoughts and have to do something about them, especially if they're negative. This is bound to create stress, suffering, dukkha. The Buddha's formula for the highest effort is worth remembering. The Buddha's words, not to let an unwholesome thought arise that's not yet arisen, not to sustain an unwholesome thought that has already arisen, to arouse a wholesome thought that has not yet arisen, to sustain a wholesome thought that has already arisen. The quicker we master this effort, the better it is for our well-being. This is part of the training we undergo in meditation. When we have learned to drop whatever arises in meditation, we can do the same with unwholesome thoughts in daily life. When we can abandon distracting thoughts, while meditating on the breath, we can use the same skill to protect our mind at all times. The more we learn to shut our mind door to the negativities that disturb our inner peace, the easier our life becomes. Peace of mind is not indifference. Recognizing and letting go is not suppression. A peaceful mind is a compassionate mind. Dukkha, stress, suffering, is self-made and self-perpetuated. If we are sincere in wanting to get rid of it, we have to watch the mind carefully. We have to gain insight into what is really happening within. What triggers us? How do we react? There are innumerable triggers, but only two reactions. One is equanimity, okayness, and the other craving, wanting. We can learn from everything. And then she gives an example. Today, some anagarikas had to wait quite a long time at the bank, which was an exercise in patience. Whether the exercise was successful or not does not matter. It was a learning experience. Everything we do is an exercise and a challenge. This is our purpose as human beings, our only reason for being here. We use the time on our little planet for learning and growing. We should think of our life as an adult education class. Any other life purpose is mistaken. We are guests here, giving a limited guest performance. If we use our time to gain insight into ourselves, our likes and dislikes, our resistances, our rejections, our worries and fears, then we are living our lives to the best advantage. It is a great skill to live in such a way. The Buddha called it urgency, samvega is the Pali word, a sense of having to work on ourselves now and not leave it for some future unspecified date when one may have more time. Everything can be a learning experience, and the only time is now. When we meet our old friend dukkha, stress, suffering, we should ask, where did you come from? When we get an answer, we should inquire again and go deeper. There's only one true answer, but we will not find it immediately. We have to go through several answers until we get to the bottom line, which is ego. When we reach this point, we know we've come to the end of the questioning and to the beginning of insight. We can then try to see how the ego has produced suffering again. What did we do? How did we react? When we see the cause, we may be able to let go of that particular wrong view. Having seen cause and effect for ourselves, we do not forget them. Single drops fill a bucket. Little by little, we purify. Every moment is worthwhile. The more we experience every moment as worthy of our attention, the more energy is generated in the mind. There are no useless moments. Every single one is important if we use it skillfully. Then strength of mind arises. Single moments add up to a life that is lived in the best possible way. Ayya Khema. Yeah.